I really don't have words for it because it's just, I've never shot on a camera that has this much dynamic range. Yep, it happened and it, I'm like speechless. Let's just get into it. First impressions, let's do it. So for those who don't know, this is Canon's latest cinema camera, the Canon C70, and my God, I've only had it for like literally 48 hours, and it has completely blown away all my expectations of what I thought it was going to be, and exceeded them. Like, I just don't even have words. Like, this is like absolute game changer, absolute next level. Let's just get into it. Right, so firstly, let's just get all the specs and stuff out of the way, and then we can go into like my first impressions of it, what I like about it, what I don't like about it, how I've like been using it the last few days, and then go from there. So the C70 has a super 35mm sensor, can shoot 4K up to 120 frames a second, which is absolutely insane. It has the C300 Mark IIs, the same sensor as that, and it's got dual gain output, which has meant that you can get up to 16 plus stops of dynamic range as far as I'm aware. And like, guys, the dynamic range out of this thing, so good. It has dual SD card slots, has built-in ND filters, anywhere from 2 stops all the way up to 10 stops. It's got a fully articulating screen, and like this thing is super clear and super bright as well, which is such a good addition to this camera. It shoots 10-bit 422 in camera up to 410 megabit per second, and it also includes Canon's famous dual pixel autofocus series 2, I believe now. So my first impressions of this when I first pulled it out of the box were just like how much bigger it was than I thought. And now it's not a big camera, like you can see it here. It's not a huge camera, but I thought it was gonna be a little bit smaller. Like, I'm not surprised, I guess. Like, I don't know, I just thought it would be like kind of like an EOS R with this little battery pack on the back. As you can see here, this is an EOS R compared to the C70. I'd say like the best camera to compare it to would be like a 1DX Mark III, which is kind of like this portion, and then like with this kind of like extra pack thing on the back. That's kind of like the closest thing I could compare it to. So the C70 now has the RF mount rather than the EF mount, which I think is a good upgrade because the RF glass that's coming out is just absolutely insane. And because it's got such a short flange distance, like you can just adapt so much stuff to fit this as well. Running on these like BP A30, BP A90 batteries is really good because I've got a C200, which I'm shooting on right now, and I've already got some of these batteries. So being able to just quickly swap these in, like these are really, really good. They're probably a little bit pricey on the pricier end, but like you get so much battery life out of these. It's really, really good. Now, another thing that really, really surprised me was how clear and sharp the screen is on this thing. Like just the pixel detail on this thing and the brightness as well. Like it's just so much better than say like the screen on the C200. That's quite sharp, but you can kind of still see like some pixels and stuff. This is just like, kind of looks like the Retina screens on like Apple products. It's just like, just so crystal clear. Now shooting with the C70 coming from a C200, it kind of was a little bit weird. I'm still trying to get used to it because I'm not really used to shooting on this like DSLR style body anymore. I mean, I have been using the EOS R, which I guess is a DSLR style body, but going from this to this, there's a few things that you have to kind of get used to and change up about how you shoot to make it work. And I'll go through a few things a little bit later about like the button positionings and whatnot. And I am gonna do a full review breaking down everything, like my full experience of it in a few weeks time, because I really want to test this out and give you guys like the best review I can. This one's just a first impression, so it will be a little bit shorter. But yeah, like subscribe if you want to see the full review of this, which will be dropping in a few weeks time. All right, so let's go through some of the things that I have really, really loved about this camera since using it over the last like 48 hours. Now, the main thing that stood out to me, which absolutely freaking blew my mind away, was the dynamic range of this thing. Now, Canon says that it has 16 plus stops of dynamic range. I'm not sure how accurate that is, but like the dynamic range coming out of this, like, I really don't have words for it because it's just, I've never shot on a camera that has this much dynamic range. And that is all thanks to that new sensor in here that has that dual gain output. Like you can literally shoot into like bright sunlight and still have detail in the shadows. Like, I just don't understand. Another thing I noticed compared to like the C200 is that it's a little bit lighter. So I think this weighs about 1.2 kilos, just under. The C200 weighs 1.45 kilos. So you're saving about like 250, 300 grams, which doesn't seem that much, but like when you're shooting all day, it actually makes a big difference. Now being able to shoot 10-bit 422 internal in here, just under SD cards, and also having the ability to have a low and a high compression option, like, absolute game changer. One of the main things that I don't like about the C200 is that the internal codecs are very limited. Like you have a 1080p option and a 4K option. There's no high or low bitrate. And you're also limited to 8-bit 420 colors. So having the ability to choose, you know, DCI 4K, Ultra HD 4K, like 1080p, 720p, but also having those high and those low compression options is really, really good. Now also on that, you have different recording formats as well. So recently I've been shooting in XF AVC, which is an MXF like container. I just really like it because it has a 4-channel audio and it's also just a really good quality. And the redundancy as well, if you have like corruption and stuff, is much, much better than say MP4. But you can also shoot in the MP4 format in 10-bit, 8-bit, and also in a H.264 and a H.265 format as well. However, the H.264 format is limited to 420 8-bit, so keep that in mind. Having 4K up to 120 frames a second is so good. I have now the option to shoot, I mean the C200 can shoot 100 frames a second, but you lose autofocus and it's only 1080p. So like having 4K up to 120 frames a second, full dual pixel autofocus, and you can record audio as well. You have to record it to a second card, but I believe, like, and the quality, oh man, the quality, so good. In terms of color profiles, you have like your standard Rec 709 and C-Log 3, but they've also added C-Log 2 to this, which is so good. So that is the format that say the C200 shoots in RAW. It's just a little bit flatter, and especially shooting in 10-bit, it just allows you to kind of hold a little bit more dynamic range. But it also has HLG and PQ mode, which is kind of like those HDR sort of format. I haven't really dove into that too much because I don't have a HDR screen. And you can also make your own color profiles as well. So you can go on there and edit it and change a few things to tweak it to make it work with your workflow and your settings. Now the C70 has false colors built in now, which is super duper good. Canon's got their own like false color index, so it's a little bit different to the ones that I've used previously, so I'm gonna have to get used to that. You can also add on a display LUT as well, which is kind of like that conversion LUT. So say we're shooting in C-Log 2, we can convert it back to Rec 709 when we're doing it in our like editing process, but you can actually see that on the display. You just literally just turn it on, flick on the LUT, and you can see what it's gonna look like, which is so good for shooting because you can get an idea and get a feel for what it's gonna look like in the final steps. And finally, for things I love about it, the focus tracking on this compared to like the ESR and the C200 is completely next level. Like the way you have to set it up isn't the best. Like you have to kind of, I've set it up to press a button and then tap on the screen with what you want to track. But like it is so sticky. Like it just, you can literally like go completely off screen with what you're tracking, come back on. And as long as you don't leave it too long, because I think it's like a time-based system, it'll just snap back to it straight away. Like, how? Like, what? Now, unfortunately, it can't just be all pros. Like, there are some things I don't like about this camera, and I really want to tell you guys about them for my first impressions. And then when I do my full review, we'll go back to it, and we'll see if the stuff that I thought were kind of like some cons now, whether they're still cons, and again, the stuff that I thought were pros, whether they're still pros, or whether they're actually cons now. So the major thing I don't like, or the major thing that I wasn't that impressed with at first, was this screen. So to me, it feels really loose. Like, I don't know if I'm just used to having like tight screens, but this little hinge here feels, I don't know, just feels like it could snap at any moment. I don't know if it's like just the way they've made it. I don't know how strong it actually is. And I guess time will tell how strong it is and if it actually fails or not. But just straight away when I pulled it out of the box, I just was really concerned with how loose this feels and how flimsy it kind of feels as well. This little function wheel they've added here is like a really good thing to have. But the problem is that when you're holding it like this, it's kind of like right where your thumb would be. And when you're not pressing any buttons and you scroll it, it doesn't do anything. You can set it up in the menu to change, your iris or your ISO or something, but I really would not recommend it because when you're shooting like this, the chances of you kind of like bumping it are really, really high. And if you're, shooting and you accidentally bump it and you set it to like, say like ISO or something, you might not notice that you've bumped up your ISO, and then afterwards you're gonna be like kicking yourself because you accidentally knocked it while you're shooting. Another thing about this function mode is that it is clicked, but it's like really lightly clicked. Like compared to this one, it is super duper light. I wish they actually like clicked it more like this one up here, because that would stop you from, you know, accidentally bumping it when you're actually shooting. On the bottom here, they've gone with this really weird mounting system. Like they've got a 3/8 in the middle and then 2/4 inch on either side. Now it is a professional camera, so I guess Canon's expecting people to just use it with those 3/8 inch accessories. But like for people that don't use it, you either have to get an adapter from 3/8 inch to 1/4 inch or mount it on one of these ones, which just offsets it and kind of makes it a little bit weird. Like I wish they'd done it this way. Like there's not that much space, so I can see why, but I wish they'd done, see this little hole here or a little bit further, I wish they'd made that a 1/4 inch one instead. Now, one thing I know that a lot of people were kind of complaining about is the fact that this timecode out isn't an SDI out. Now for me, like I don't use SDI as much, I just use HDMI and I could convert to SDI if I really wanted to. But a lot of people like the locking mechanism on SDI, and it's just a weird design. Like they've added the port there, but it's just not SDI out. So why they've done that, I really have no idea. Right, now since using this over the past 48 hours, I have actually changed a few settings on the camera to really suit my workflow coming from a C200. The main thing is that this scroll wheel up the top, it's usually set to iris or aperture. I have actually changed this to ISO because typically I'm not changing aperture that much. And if I really need to, I can just do it on the screen. So I've set this to ISO so I can quickly change that. And having obviously the ND filters, you can quickly chuck an ND on, quickly change the ISO to get perfect exposure, like ridiculously quick. Another thing I've done is change this waveform monitor button over here to actually be the record button. You can see that it's actually red, so it's set up to be a secondary function record button. And the good thing about this as well is that waveform monitor can be turned on the display as well. So when you go into that little new quick menu, you can just quickly turn on your LUTs and your peaking and all that stuff on the actual display itself. And typically I'm not turning waveform monitor on and off like really quickly. I typically use it to like expose and then turn it off. Whereas having a record button on here is really good, especially when you're holding it with the handle, then you can quickly press this and start going rather than kind of having to try and get over here to this record button. I've also set up this button 11 down here to be my slow and fast motion, which allows me to basically change from say like 25 frames a second to that 100 frames a second with just a click of a button. You can do it pretty quickly with that new quick menu, but I just wanted to set up something so I could just quickly go bam, straight into slow motion, bam, back to normal without having to do too much. This function button number 10 up here, I've actually changed to the tracking mode, which allows me to basically click this and then tap on the screen, and whatever I tap on will track, which has been a really handy upgrade. But apart from that, that's actually all I've really changed, and you don't really need to change it. It's just like, I just prefer coming from a C200 to have those buttons in those different spots just because of what I'm used to. So that's definitely helped, having this record button here and having that as the ISO. All right guys, that is it for this first impressions of the Canon C70. If you did enjoy this one, then consider liking and subscribing, because I'm gonna be releasing that full review like really in depth in a few weeks time, once I've actually got a bit more time to really put this through its paces and really see what it's capable of. But until then guys, stay creative and just be you. See ya.